My name is Irene P. Alvarado. I'm 27 years old, and the Christmas dinner that destroyed my engagement began with my fiancé smiling at me and asking me to be mature. Caleb and I had been engaged for 8 months, together for almost 3 years, and until last December, I honestly thought I was standing inside the kind of relationship people spend years hoping to find. We met at a friend's wedding, one of those warm, chaotic receptions where everyone is slightly overdressed and pretending they know how to dance. He made me laugh within 10 minutes. Not polite laughter, real laughter, the kind that makes you lean in because you want to hear what he says next. He worked in marketing, I worked in project operations, and from the beginning, we had this chemistry that felt easy. Not explosive, not toxic, not dramatic, easy. At the time, that felt like maturity. Looking back, I think I confused ease with safety. The red flags didn't arrive like alarms. They arrived like drafts under a closed door. Small things. Caleb started checking his phone more often, and not casually either, but with this alertness that told me certain messages mattered more than others. He'd leave the room to answer calls. He started mentioning his ex-girlfriend Danielle in passing, more often than he used to, usually in this neutral tone that somehow felt too rehearsed to be truly neutral. He still followed her online, which I had never loved, but I'd told myself not to be insecure. Then one night, after a mutual friend's birthday, he came home talking about how good Danielle looked, how put together she seemed, how her fiancé Evan must be treating her well because she looked lighter. That word stayed with me, lighter. It wasn't jealousy exactly that I felt, it was recognition. Something in him had brightened while talking about her, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. Then came the conversation. It was a Thursday evening in October, cold outside, the two of us half watching a show neither of us cared about. Caleb muted the TV and turned toward me with that careful expression people use when they want something and already know they might not deserve it. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually listen," he said. My stomach tightened before he even finished. Then he told me Danielle was going through a rough time. Her fiancé was apparently pulling away. His mother had invited her to Christmas dinner, but she felt awkward about coming unless Caleb personally reached out and made it clear she was welcome. He said, "Please be mature about it," in that soft, measured tone people use when they want to frame your discomfort as immaturity before you've even spoken. I smiled. I actually smiled. "Of course," I said. "Why not?" The relief that washed over his face hit me harder than the request itself. He looked too grateful, too eager, like I hadn't just agreed to a socially awkward dinner, but removed an obstacle he'd been quietly worrying about. And in that exact moment, without fully admitting it to myself, I made my decision. If Danielle was coming, Evan was coming too. I found him that same night. Public Instagram, mutual connections, a face I vaguely recognized from old tagged photos. He looked decent, tired maybe, but decent. There was something restrained about his smile in his recent photos, the kind of expression people wear when they're trying not to let a private hurt become public. I sent him a message introducing myself as Caleb's fiancé. I kept it simple. I told him my family was hosting Christmas dinner, that Danielle would be there, and that if he didn't want to spend the holiday alone, he'd be welcome too. I wrote that it might be awkward, but awkward was sometimes better than lonely. He replied within an hour. He thanked me, he said yes. And then I sat there in the dark, phone in hand, asking myself what exactly I was doing. The answer was not flattering. I was creating a situation. I was setting a trap, or at least building a room where truth might finally run out of exits. The week before Christmas, I mentioned it to my brother while we were at the gym. Not the full emotional reasoning, just the facts. Caleb invited Danielle. I invited Evan. My brother stared at me over his water bottle and said, "That's either genius or insane." I asked him which one. He said, "The part where you didn't tell Caleb means you already know something's wrong." He wasn't wrong. If I'd felt secure, I would have had no reason to keep it quiet. But I did keep it quiet, and that meant my instincts were already ahead of my loyalty. Christmas Day arrived smelling like cinnamon, roasted turkey, and pine. My parents' house looked perfect in that slightly overwhelming holiday way my mother loved. Everything glowed. Candles, garland, the polished silverware. My father was in the kitchen pretending he wasn't stressed. My siblings were pouring drinks. I was arranging napkins while Caleb moved through the house with this nervous brightness that made me feel strangely calm. Danielle arrived first. Of course she did. She came in carrying wine and flowers, wearing a cream coat and a smile that was just vulnerable enough to be effective. Caleb hugged her, and I watched the hug last a second too long. Not scandalously long, just long enough that anyone paying attention would notice. "It's so good to see you," he said, and there was warmth in his voice that I had not heard directed at me in weeks. Danielle laughed at something he said before I even heard the joke. They fell into step beside the tree, like a pair of dancers returning to a routine they both still remembered. My brother caught my eye from across the room. He didn't have to say anything. I checked my phone. Evan had texted that he was outside. When the doorbell rang, the entire evening shifted. My mom opened the door, still smiling from Danielle's arrival, still operating under the assumption that this was just a slightly unconventional but harmless holiday dinner. Then Evan stepped inside, and everything paused. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. He walked in with quiet composure, holding a glass dish with a homemade dessert, like he had rehearsed being normal. But the moment Danielle saw him, her expression cracked for half a second. Just enough. Surprise first, then recognition, then something deeper, something like resignation. Caleb turned, saw Evan, and I watched the exact second the night stopped being manageable. What is he doing here?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. Danielle didn't answer. She looked at me instead, and I could see it in her eyes. Understanding. "You invited him," Caleb said, turning to me. "I did," I replied calmly. His jaw tightened. "Why would you do that?" "Because he deserves to not spend Christmas alone," I said evenly. "Isn't that what you said about Danielle?" That landed. Hard. Danielle stepped further inside, setting her dish down like she belonged there, like she refused to be reduced to the awkward guest in a story she didn't choose. Evan followed her in, quieter, but alert. Caleb stood frozen for a moment, then muttered something under his breath and walked toward the hallway. Danielle hesitated, then followed him. Of course she did. The door to the hallway didn't fully close, and voices carried. "What the hell is this?" Caleb whispered harshly. "Yeah, you tell me," Danielle shot back. "I didn't know she invited him." "Well, now he's here." I stayed where I was. I didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't my scene to control anymore. This was the truth catching up. Danielle came back first. Her face was composed again, but not soft. Caleb followed, less composed, less certain. My mom, bless her, tried to salvage the moment. "Dinner's ready," she said too brightly. We all sat down. And it was the longest meal of my life. Everyone tried to pretend. That's the funny thing about people. We cling to normal, even when it's clearly gone. My dad asked Caleb about work. My brother tried to pull Evan into a conversation about sports. My mom complimented Danielle's coat like none of this was happening. But underneath it, everything was shifting. Every glance, every pause, every word that wasn't said. Caleb sat next to me, rigid, quiet. Danielle avoided looking at Evan. Evan, on the other hand, watched everything. About 20 minutes in, the pretending started to crack. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was precise. Danielle set down her fork and looked across the table. At Evan. "So," she said lightly, "when was the wedding supposed to be?" The room went still. Evan didn't answer immediately. Caleb shifted in his seat. "July, right?" Danielle continued, cutting her turkey with slow, deliberate movements. There was something in her voice now. Not anger. Not exactly. Clarity. "I've been thinking about July a lot," she added. "Specifically when you told me you were in Chicago for work." Evan's hand tightened slightly around his glass. "And then I found out you were actually in Miami," she finished. Silence. Complete. My mom froze mid-reach for the wine. My dad cleared his throat but didn't speak. Caleb stared at his plate, and I watched. Because now it was all out. Not just my situation. All of it. "I'm not trying to make a scene," Danielle said calmly. "I just think it's interesting how people manage to live two lives at the same time." Her eyes flicked to Caleb. Just for a second. But it was enough. Caleb looked up. Their eyes met. And in that moment, everything I had suspected became real. Not confirmed in words, confirmed in silence. "We should go," Caleb said suddenly, his voice low. "Already?" my mom asked, trying to keep things together. "Yes," he said quickly. "We should go." He stood. I didn't. "I'm not done eating," I said quietly. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. The irony almost made me laugh. "We need to talk," he said. "Then talk," I replied. "Not here." I set my fork down slowly. "No," I said. "You don't get to control where the conversation happens." His face tightened. "You did this," he said under his breath. "No," I corrected softly. "I revealed it." That hit harder than anything else, because he knew it was true. Danielle pushed her chair back. "I think I'm done too," she said, standing. Evan followed her. The two of them didn't look at each other, but they walked out together. Caleb and I left shortly after. The drive home was silent, except for him breathing too fast, except for me thinking too clearly. When we got inside, he finally spoke. "What the hell was that?" he snapped. "That," I said calmly, "was the truth." He ran a hand through his hair. "You humiliated me." I let that sit. Then I said quietly, "Did I?" He stopped. Because we both knew he had done that himself. The apartment felt different that night. Not unfamiliar, not broken. Just exposed. Like everything we had built together was still physically there, but whatever held it together had been quietly removed. Caleb didn't yell again. That surprised me. Instead, he paced back and forth across the living room like he was trying to outrun something that was already inside him. "You blindsided me," he said finally. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded. "So did you," I replied. He stopped pacing. "That's not the same." "It is," I said calmly. "You just don't like being on the receiving end of it." Silence stretched between us. Not empty. Heavy. "You made me look like a liar," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "Were you telling the truth?" That landed. Hard. He exhaled sharply, looking away. "That's not the point." "It is the only point," I said quietly. He ran his hands over his face. I didn't plan for any of this," he muttered. "No," I said. "You just didn't plan for me to find out." That was the difference. Not intention. Exposure. We stood there for a long moment, both of us understanding something neither of us wanted to say out loud. "You still have feelings for her," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. Which was an answer. "I don't know what I feel," he said eventually, and that might have been the most honest thing he'd said all night. "And that's supposed to be enough for me?" I asked. He looked at me then. Really looked. "I don't want to lose you," he said. I almost smiled. Not because it was sweet, because it was too late. "You already did," I replied. The next 2 weeks felt like living in a waiting room. We didn't officially break up, but we weren't together either. We existed in this strange middle space where everything was undecided, but nothing felt hopeful. He talked to Danielle. I knew that without asking. The way he checked his phone, the way his attention drifted, the way he seemed somewhere else, even when he was standing right in front of me. I didn't fight it. I didn't ask him to stop, because I wasn't interested in competing for something that should have already been mine. Then came the shift. Not dramatic, not loud, quiet. Danielle chose Evan. They went to therapy, worked things out, rebuilt something that had almost collapsed. And Caleb was left standing outside of that. I watched it happen in real time. The messages stopped. The tension shifted. The illusion broke. He wasn't in love with Danielle. He was in love with the idea of her. The version of her that existed in memory. Not the one who chose someone else when it mattered. That realization hit him slowly. But when it did, it hit hard. "I think I made a mistake," he said one night, sitting across from me on the couch. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. "What would you like me to say?" I asked calmly. "I don't know," he admitted. "Neither do I said. And that was the truth. Because whatever version of us had existed before Christmas was gone. By the end of January, we called it. No drama, no final fight. Just a quiet mutual understanding that there was nothing left to repair. We sold the apartment, split everything, packed our lives into separate boxes, and walked away. A month later, Caleb called me. "Why did you do it?" he asked. I knew what he meant. "Invite Evan," I said. "Yes." I thought about it for a moment. "Because I already knew something was wrong," I said. "I just needed to see it clearly." "You could have talked to me." "I did," I replied. "You just didn't answer honestly." He was quiet. "I guess I deserved that," he said eventually. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I just let it sit. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking, not about him, about myself. About the moment I decided to invite Evan. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't maturity. It was instinct. A part of me already knew the relationship was slipping. I just needed proof strong enough to stop pretending. Therapy helped me understand that. Helped me see that I wasn't trying to create chaos. I was trying to force clarity. And sometimes, clarity looks like destruction. I'm not proud of how I handled Christmas. It was calculated, deliberate, a little cruel. But I'm not sorry either. Because without that moment, we would have dragged this out for months, maybe years, pretending everything was fine, until resentment turned into something worse. Now, it's March. Life feels different, quieter, cleaner. I moved in with my brother for a while. started rebuilding routines, started listening to myself again. Danielle and Evan got married in June. I saw the photos. She looked genuinely happy, not performative, not forced, real. And Caleb? He disappeared from my life the way people do when they realize they can't return to who they were before. I don't hate him. I don't even resent him. I just see him clearly now, and that clarity is enough. I learned something through all of this, something I didn't expect. That instinct matters. That discomfort is information. And that, sometimes, the only way to find the truth is to stop being the reasonable one long enough to let reality speak for itself. Because in the end, the dinner didn't destroy my relationship. It revealed it. And that made all the difference.